Welcome to Slayerfest 98. I'm Ian Carlos Crawford.
I'm Philip Ellis.
I'm Dana Pickley.
I'm Latoya Ferguson.
I'm Zachary Patton Garcia.
I'm Adam Sass.
I'm Kimberly Ann Southwick. And I'm Kirsten White.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad you are all here. So I wanted to do this episode with all of my trusted co-hosts. And basically, everyone knows we took a pause from covering Buffy after Charisma Carpenter made her statement, and Amber Benson and Michelle Trachtenberg and Sarah Michelle Gellar. And I kind of wanted to do this before we got back into the show and back into Buffy season 7, because I do think the show is still worth talking about, even if Joss Whedon is the fucking worst. I think there are aspects of the show that are worth discussing and are still relevant today. And I said this before on the podcast, I said this many times, even before everyone released these statements, is that the show has always been a sum of all of its parts. It wasn't always just great because Joss thought of it and created it. I don't think lesser actors would have made the show fall flat. Like, lesser actors wouldn't have been able to deliver these lines, wouldn't have been able to carry these plot lines that, I mean, I feel like you've all probably experienced this before Buffy became as popular as it is, when you try to get people into it and you give your elevator pitch and people will be like, what the fuck is that? But you know what I mean? Like now it's so culturally, it's like ingrained in our culture, almost the way that, like, you know, people who love Harry Potter have been through this, where they like love the show, but can understand that you
leaving the auteur behind.
Yes. But so I wanted to do this just to do a little house cleaning, so everyone who listens to the podcast and who might be on in the future knows where we all stand, where I stand, where all of you stand, and that, you know, we stand with Ray Fisher, we stand with Charisma Carpenter, we stand with everyone who has come forward with these awful stories about how Joss was just a nightmare and created such a toxic, terrible work environment. And I think it's a credit to these folks that they still stood by their characters and they still gave these fucking phenomenal performances, even while working in such terrible work conditions, because I'm a big brat and I don't know that I would be able to still be like, yes, I'm going to put my best foot forward and commit to this role while my boss is the, you know, worst person. I don't know that I would have done that.
Well, I was like an intern and an assistant and a PA for many, many years, and encountered a lot of great people. And I have worked for some nightmares who don't even come close to the stories that we are hearing about Joss. And I found working with them, my body literally would shut down. Like, so to me, even hearing these stories, I'm like, I don't even know how you complete a day on set, because it is that anxiety inducing to be around someone who's doing like a 10th of what everyone has said Joss has done and Joss has done. Like, so it's not to, you know, be like my firsthand knowledge here, but this is one of those things where, like, there was a very visceral reaction, you know, hearing, you know, this left and right. This is something that's been tolerated in Hollywood for way too long, as just sort of like, oh, well, he's a genius and he's, you know, the auteur and he's the, you know, the reason behind the thing, and he's the reason we all have jobs, and so we're going to put down no boundaries at all, and it just, you know, feeds the worst people.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there are, like, you know, I've unfortunately worked many a retail job where the bosses are really bad, and, you know, even just in that environment, I become like, well, I need to quit this job. So I can't imagine it being as toxic as it was on Buffy and still committing and still doing that. Because yeah, Adam, I think when a boss is like that, it's hard to, I mean, you're in fear of what they're gonna yell at you, or in fear of, you know, if you're like Michelle Trachtenberg, you know, put out that statement saying that he wasn't allowed in a room with her. Like, Jesus Christ, I truly can't imagine working under those terrible, terrible conditions.
There's a specific type of Hollywood nightmare guy who kind of knows that everyone around him really needs this to work out, and also is probably walking into this with decades and decades of, you know, Hollywood stories going like, oh yeah, this is sort of the gig. This is the thing.
Yeah, I think that's important to point out, Adam, that it had been normalized for literally decades, almost a century, before the Me Too movement really kicked off, people actually coming out about the fact that situations and environments like this are abusive.
Mm-hmm. Right. And extremely retaliatory if you even acted upset about the treatment. much less tried to bring it to light, much less tried to get anything sort of done about it. So, I mean, there's a reason why, everyone's statements come with sort of this caveat of like, I, have to say something now, even though I'm like still terrified of the retaliation.
Yeah.
There's a major, you see the retaliation happen, and there, and Joss was obviously not quiet that he wasn't subtle of what the retaliation would be. So
yeah, I think that Tim, that's also an important point that like this probably, I'm sure many other people who worked on TV shows and movies probably also worked under conditions like this, but like didn't speak up just because it was normalized, right?
Yeah.
The whole Joss thing makes me think of that phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And some people are incapable of holding the keys to the kingdom without being tyrants.
Yeah. This is going to be a very weird example, but I can remember when Caitlyn Jenner came out in support of Trump, and my grandma being like, how could she do that? And then stopping herself and looking at me and goes, well, she's rich. That's how, And I was like, well, my grandma's right. Like, because once you get power, you kind of, it's just wild to think that he wrote especially for the time, such a feminist show, but was, he would have been a villain Buffy would be fighting, right? Like he would have been one of the guys that was like, she broke his nose at swim meet or whatever in the car when he tried to hit on her. Like,
I mean, he's Warren.
Yeah, he's Warren. Yes, that's more accurate. Yes.
He's more of one of the subtle villains. Like, I like to talk shit on Xander a lot, but I'm going to use it for a good purpose here, which is, at the time, Xander probably didn't seem to be so terrible than when we look back at him decades later. And similarly, I think Joss maybe in some situations, not all, because I think some of them maybe it was clear that he was a villain at the time, like the Michelle Trachtenberg situation. But, some of the stuff he did, I'm sure, was more subtle and therefore, got brushed off.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me how, I mean, we're talking about like the Me Too and Time's Up movements, and how in entertainment or in any kind of creative industry, there is this myth of the auteur or the genius where a lot of behavior kind of is forgiven or excused because it's like, oh well, he's the showrunner, he's the mind behind it. But I remember when I was 19, 20 working in kitchens. I'm a journalist, so I've worked in my fair share of kitchens, and seeing a chef who is in his 40s bawling at this 16-year-old waitress and reducing her to tears. And if I had not stepped in and told him to back off, it's like, oh, he would have just done that and not thought a single thing of it. So it literally is in every industry. And but when it comes to art and TV and movies, it's sort of there is an even more kind of special dispensation given to these men who are just assholes.
Yeah. I don't know if I know Adam and Kirsten do, but does anyone else watch Hacks?
I'm a couple episodes behind, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I really recommend it, and I'm going to have a light spoiler for the newest episode, LaToya. I'm sorry.
How dare you?
But like in it, she goes to like a comedy club that's like outside of her regular routine, and we see that like the man who's currently running this comedy club, she's talking about how in the past this used to happen, etc., etc. And we see that the man who's running it now is still doing the same shit in 2021. And I thought that was like a really good, I don't know, it was a really good point to make that like she felt, oh, that only happened back then. And we see that like, oh no, this man who's like younger and whatever is like still harassing the women working the comedy club now. And, I think the first thing he says to her is like, oh, I love big tits, or like something ridiculous like that. And we see this woman like shrink, and we watch Jean Smart watch it happen. And it's, it's still happening. I think people are just, I think Jean Smart, I thought of her character and how she felt to her it doesn't really happen anymore. And then she's watched it, like personally watched it happen. And I think that's like, I don't know. It's, it's still happening. So I think it's important that these stories are coming out and that, folks like Charisma Carpenter are willing to like start this conversation with the Buffy, like how Buffy was always toxic. What Ray Fisher is saying didn't just happen on Justice League. It was always how he was. And like you said, Dana, I'm sure he got power and then he became, I'm sure it was a little bit there, but he got the power to be that toxic, and he was in control, and he got away with it more so than he would have if he weren't the showrunner, the person that's the highest up, which is shitty, but right, I think that's probably what happened.
Well, I mean, we're seeing these two timeline spectrums for Joss's career, the Justice League being the most recent, Buffy being kind of more earlier, but he's worked on a lot of sets in between then, and I'm almost nervous thinking about stories that might be being suppressed on Marvel sets, because we have not heard any stories off of those sets, and it seems odd that would just be a period in which he would behave himself. But
right,
because what's happening is, when this is talked about, when it is a Joss property, it kind of starts to taint the project totally, like Buffy and then Justice League, but that's been kind of co-opted and kind of taken back over by Zack Snyder, so it feels less of a Joss identity project. But I don't know if there are sets from the Avengers one, because again, I'm sure a whole bunch of set nightmare behavior moments coming out of the Avengers set would be pretty damaging to the brand, and I love it. So that's something that's always running through my head, because it's one of these things where these guys don't ever stop.
Yeah, and you think about like the when the question comes up, well, how could somebody like this get away with something like this for so long? Well, you also keep in mind that he's somebody who has had many projects going over the years, and he works with a lot of the same people. And you think about these people who maybe didn't work for this period of time or for this long, and they're maybe holding out hope for, if there's a Buffy revival, well, you don't want to get on Joss Whedon's bad side, because then you're not part of the Buffy revival, right? And I remember it was like a year-ish ago that Charisma did come out and say something, but it felt like a very muted sort of something. Like she was trying to raise her voice up a little bit, but also there was a little bit of fear there. And I would be very curious to ask her if maybe she was worried about pissing him off so much was she afraid of retaliation and not getting to work on any of these projects if everybody seemed to get back together again? Because you do speak out, and you're the one ostracized if everybody doesn't back you up.
Yeah, I actually do remember that, Zach. I think it was I think it might have been Comic Book Resources. There was an article where someone put unknown facts about Buffy, and someone put in the list oh, Charisma Carpenter didn't tell Joss Whedon she was pregnant and got fired. And Charisma, she was really pissed. And you looking back, you're like, oh, well, I understand why she was pissed at this writer who probably got paid $20 to write this article, but I understand why she was pissed, because that's not what happened. And she went on a thread. I think she did a tweet thread that was hey, that's absolutely not what happened. I've spoken about this before. This is not true. And on the outside, I thought oh, this poor writer. But on her side, it's you understand why she would absolutely not want that in print, saying that it was her fucking fault, because it's not. It's just being a fucking nightmare.
I mean, as a person who has made money from the Buffyverse, right? I got hired to write spin-off novels. And it was weird. Even at the time, I was very careful not to mention Joss, both because, even back then there were rumblings that he was not a pleasant person to work with. But also because he wasn't involved in the project at all. And I had this fear that if people knew that, then they'd be like, well, it's not really canon. And I'm like, well, he doesn't own it. It's not his anymore. If I got hired to write and it's officially licensed, guess what? It's canon. But it was always really a weird thing to dance around, right? And even this, I was nervous about doing this. We had conversations about it. And I finally was like, well, I'm not writing Buffy anymore. I doubt I will ever again in the future, just because it's with a different publisher now that Disney owns literally everything under the sun. And so it's this weird thing where you're you either know something is happening or you've heard rumors something is happening. But when you are a professional in a certain field, there's this fear that if you talk about it, either there are going to be immediate repercussions, or there's going to be the sense of we can't trust her with IP. We can't trust her with big properties because she might say negative things down the line. And and I experienced that not just with Buffy. I'm really careful not to speak negatively about television shows or movies. Cause let's say I trash a movie and then somebody involved with that movie later has an opportunity to work on one of my projects, and they're like, no, that, she said mean things about me on Twitter and it hurt my feelings. I don't like her anymore. So there is this weird sense of everything is so connected. Everybody knows everybody. And there's that fear. There's that fear that if this is your livelihood, and you say something wrong, or you participate in the wrong conversation, or you don't correct an error that goes out on Twitter or whatever, that you're going to be damaging like future income, future opportunities, and like even more so in Hollywood than in what I do, because what I do tends to be very solitary, right? It's not as interconnected.
Right.
And so it's a weird thing to try to engage with, that like I've contributed to the Buffyverse. I'm part of the Buffyverse. And it was started by somebody who is sort of the antithesis of what Buffy stands for, right? And I think that as creators, as fans, that's what we have to grapple with. Like, what does Buffy mean to us personally? What did it cost people to get that to us? But also, like, how many other people have been involved in creating and telling these stories? And like, honestly, I will tell writers all day, every day, the idea is the least important part of any project. Like, ideas are, you can come up with 100 ideas in a day. Like, it's not the idea, it's the execution. And in the case of Buffy, the execution was in such a large part, it's the producers, it's the costuming, it's the writers, it's the actors. I mean, the actors, I would say, carry the weight of it at all times. Like, the editors, like, there are so many people who work to bring these things that, when you boil it down to, well, that one person associated with it is problematic, so we can't enjoy it anymore. It's a conversation that lacks nuance, and it's a conversation that doesn't recognize that, that one person isn't, like, Joss Whedon isn't Buffy. Buffy is,
Right.
Buffy is so much bigger and so much more than that.
Yeah, no, I think, Dana, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know you've actually probably interviewed more Buffy people than I have on this podcast.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, to me, Buffy is so much the sum of its, more than the sum of its parts. And there are so many amazing, inspiring people that have been involved in this and have carried the torch for it for, 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
That it's such a weird place to be in as a fan. And I know so many fans feel this way. And I think that a lot of Harry Potter fans feel the same way.
Right.
But to me, Buffy has always been Amber Benson and Sarah Michelle Gellar and Marty Noxon and, these people that created important pieces of my, experience as a fan and experience as a person growing up. So, yeah. I could go through this world with never hearing his name again, but it's important to me how important Buffy was and is to the people that were involved with it.
Yeah, and actually, I've been thinking a lot about Dana and LaToya when we interviewed Amber, because I did have some people tweet at me being like, she definitely was like being polite about talking about that. And I think that's probably really accurate, and I don't know, LaToya, so you also host another Buffy, Angel podcast. What do you feel?
What do I feel in general? So when we discussed that, we did have a little thing where myself and my Angel on Top co-host and the Buffering Ladies, we talked about it, and I punctuated it all by just saying "fuck Joss Whedon." So that's how I feel about that. I want to just circle back to talking about the charisma pregnancy thing, and how she called out that writer for it being wrong, because like that was always the the rumor since like season 4 of Angel. So like that has stayed with her despite it being false for so many years at this point. And people talk obviously in the industry, like without being even using the word difficult, that essentially gives her the bill of being a difficult actress, does it not? Yeah.
Right.
It's just the way lies in his favor, which even if it's not even in his favor, because it's like, she didn't say she was pregnant, so he fired her. How is that in his favor?
Right. Yeah.
Somehow Charisma was the bad guy in that fake story anyway. I don't understand it, actually.
LaToya, I just wanted to pop in and say that makes a lot of sense, because people who get into positions of power and abuse their power, they don't do it alone. They surround themselves with enablers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Kind of just like backing up what everyone else was saying, like it's sort of based on this assumption that the woman, the actress is the problem, and that Joss was kind of just like writing his way out of a corner kind of thing. And that, a woman having a baby, that's a real, she's throwing a spanner into the works of his vision. And it's like, well, no, like in any other workplace, a woman disclosing like, oh, okay, I'm having a baby, that would not be grounds for like her ending up without a fucking job.
It's actually illegal.
I mean,
yeah.
Like there are so many repercussions all the time for women's reproductive choices, right? And that's what pisses me off so much is that Joss was always hailed as this like great feminist storyteller, which when you revisit a lot of the stories, it's not that. It's that he hired great actresses and he had good writers, right? But a lot of his stuff is deeply anti-feminist. But to take an actress and to say, oh, you've made a reproductive choice that mildly inconveniences my storylines, you're out. Like it's just so typical, and it's so deeply anti-feminist. And how anyone, even when it was framed as she didn't tell him she was pregnant, like so what? You don't have to. Like it's just. Right. And it makes me so mad too because it's so illegal, right? It's so illegal to fire someone for that, but they'll always find another way around it. And yeah, like it just makes me very angry.
Yeah, and I wanted to add it's illegal in the United States to fire someone or not hire someone because they're pregnant. So I was 7 months pregnant on my first academic job on-campus interview. And I remember being super nervous. I was told by my colleagues, they specifically told me, they said, don't tell them you're pregnant until you get a campus interview.
This is so apropos right now that the baby's babbling.
I know.
It's so cute.
Esme's like, it was me.
Damn, you're fired from the podcast. Get out.
But Kim, I remember you were worried about that. And I remember you saying, like, I'm not posting about my pregnancy till...
I didn't until I got the job, actually. I didn't put it on social media at all. Like that. And I was 8 months pregnant at that point.
Yeah. And like, I was thinking about that a lot in relation to this. And yeah, Kirsten, I actually wanted to go back to what you said too, that like, sometimes when you revisit Joss's work, like we did with Firefly, it's not always, it doesn't hold up as feminist because there's a lot like
Mal calling Inara a whore a bunch. That
yeah.
Like he calls her a whore like every scene they're in together he's like calling her that.
So much of what we do as Buffy fans, right, is we love this show for what it was, and at the time a lot of the representation was groundbreaking, but we can also acknowledge 20 years later that a lot of it falls flat and that there was a lot lacking from that. And I think it almost helps, right, that we have this much distance because we've already been able to say like, you know what, Xander's not a great character. He's pretty slut-shamey. He's pretty creepy. And we can say like, oh, it would have been nice if, they had Willow be bisexual and we could have had good bi rep, or, they didn't have great gay male rep. The racist rep was, again, like terrible. And so like we have the distance from it to be able to critique it and to say, this is a thing that's not perfect, but it meant and means a lot to us and we can love it and talk about the way it's imperfect. And I love that because it's not like, and I think it makes it easier to talk about these issues and to talk about Joss because it's not an active property, right? Like it's not still ongoing. It is in the past. And so, we can acknowledge that there was harm done, right? That it was a toxic environment. And we can, I mean, obviously you have to acknowledge it, but there can also be that sort of degree of separation where we can still appreciate what the show was and what the actors accomplished.
I'd like to add too that just because someone writes a feminist character or an anti-racist character, etc., doesn't make the person who's doing the writing an anti-racist or a feminist, for example.
Yeah. I mean, I know I said earlier that it is wild, but I just can't see a world in which I write that and then I'm like, I'm the villain that I wrote, but like, I think it's fine. A lot of writers are like that, right? I mean.
Well, it's cognitive dissonance. He doesn't think he's this way. He thinks he's whatever, fill in the blank. Like he just, and this is like, he's pulling comic book tropes, these kind of powerful women. They're superheroes, really. So a lot of this was just because in the late 90s, we weren't really putting on film a lot of like superhero women characters, even though they were living in comic books. He was just sort of mining that.
Yeah.
And I mean, like there's people who write books and tweets that go against everything they say all the time. Like it's humanity to be like, oh yeah, this requires a different part of your brain, and then you super compartmentalize that because I guarantee you he thinks he's not done a single thing wrong.
Yeah, I mean it's like how many times did on gay Twitter we see so many gays are like, wear your mask, how dare you, blah blah blah, and then suddenly they're on a maskless vacation in whatever random island, right? Mm-hmm. Like. and they were the first people shaming everyone for not wearing a
Heard of
mask. And
it,
it's like,
yeah.
but you're doing the thing. Yeah. And I do think that Kirsten, you touched upon this too, that so many people worked on this show. And, I know Dana and LaToya, you've both interviewed a lot of these folks as well as I have. And I do think these people are proud of their work, right? Like, I don't think they're faking it when they're talking about how much they love their work. I do think they are proud of it, and they should be, because it's great work.
Well, I think they're proud of their work, but I think more than anything, they're proud of the legacy of the connection between the show and their fans. I think that's always been this very deeply rooted thing. Like with Amber, for instance, like she's so connected to how important that character was to fans, and to her, that's probably Buffy's legacy, at least from her from her part. So yeah, I mean, I can't tell you what everyone's thinking, because it's delicate. You don't want to ask people in interviews like,
right.
Well, this is shitty, right? So
Right.
What do you think? What do you think of the legacy now? I just have to trust in what they have done and what they have said, and the people that they've been to their fans for these 2 decades, and they've been amazing people.
Yeah, I think they have every right to be proud of their work too, and just the connection that their characters have created with people. All of us, obviously. I mean, as far as I know, just from talking to people and reading things and being obsessed, like, I think there's like maybe only one cast member in the entire Buffyverse who was not happy with their work, but it wasn't great anyway.
But I think that a lot of and Dana and LaToya, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but like a lot of the actors that we've spoken to, I do think a lot of the bonds they've seemed to have built with each other have been from doing the cons together post shows. I think of like Claire Kramer and Amber Benson and Charisma Carpenter, and Mercedes McNabb, who all seem to have fun together at cons. And none of them shared that many. Charisma and Amber had no scenes together. Charisma and Claire had no scenes together, but they all seem to have formed a bond. And I think that probably says more about the show than
think about how many shows there have been and how few casts still run into each other or have things that they do together.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's like something specific to genre shows, and maybe the cast of Star Trek is the only one that are all still BFF.
The cast of Friends had to be paid like $5 million each just to get into a room together.
But yeah, I do think, Zach, I want you to, you've talked about a lot how you do think the show does belong to the fans at this point. And I do think that's a really smart point and important point, right? I think that's true.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does belong to the fans at this point, and I think it's been said a lot in here up till now that it does belong to everybody who put their blood, sweat, and tears into the show. Buffy wasn't Joss Whedon. Buffy was everybody who worked on it. And you imagine there was probably not just Joss Whedon being problematic on that show. It was probably tons of other people that, we may never even hear of. It's a show that, with its longevity now, it does belong to the fans at this point. I don't know what the details are on, if he makes money off of the show, how much he makes off of the show and stuff like that. But it just is, he's never usually the first person I think of when I think of this show, It just is everybody else's. And that's what happens when a creator creates something and puts it out into the world and it's beloved by, a bunch of people. It almost stops being, becoming just his. I never understand when people put so much weight onto, and Kirsten kind of touched on this, the idea man, he had the feminist idea, the single feminist idea. That doesn't mean every part was his feminist idea. It was all of the people who put all of this into these characters and these storylines. The writers were writing their own traumas into these stories. The actors were bringing their own sort of emotions that they've carried with them into the roles. And, when fans watch it, we're watching things that we tie to ourselves. Like The Body is such an important episode for me because the first time I saw it was the first time around the first time I'd ever really experienced anything having to do with death. And it was just such a thing that shook me to the core that when I saw this episode, it spoke to me in a way that I didn't even know how to explain how it spoke to me. And so it's tied to the fans, and I think it hasn't been tied to Joss Whedon for a very long time now.
Yeah, I mean, right, there's a world in which that creator is proud of that, because that isn't always because the creator was bad. Like, it's just the show is beloved, and that's how that works. But in this case, it works to fans' advantage because, he's not. It's the show. It's the story. There's a zillion people working on that story, and I think that all of those people are their work is worth it to talk about. I especially think of Cordelia a lot because I don't think if it wasn't Charisma Carpenter playing that role, I think Cordelia would have been very much a one-dimensional mean girl that came in, maybe she helped them sometimes, but she was just very mean and that's it. But Charisma brought nuance to that role. And I mean, LaToya, I even think of when we interviewed her. Remember, she jokingly was like, what, does everyone just love a bitch? And we were like, no, that's not who Cordelia was. We loved her because she was more than that.
We've talked about it a million times. I've written about this before. It's not easy to make a mean girl that's actually lovable. I mean, otherwise it's like an Emma Roberts and any Ryan Murphy thing. There's a difference between being a lovable mean girl and just being a horrible, horrible human being, which Cordelia was never a horrible, horrible human being, which was very key. And I think that Charisma brought a lot of just heart to it. That's why, she goes to the spinoff as the female lead. She's not one note, and you could tell pretty early into Buffy, even just without her getting much time, her comedic timing is impeccable, obviously, which you don't really need that from a mean girl character. Charisma brought so much, and I've been thinking a lot, as we're all talking about the whole idea of separating the art from the artist, and in general, I kind of hate that because the difference between that and what we're talking about here is that separating the art from the artist, with Woody Allen. If you're going to be defending Woody Allen, then no one is defending Joss here either. It's not these actors are he was a piece of shit, but it's not that. And I think that as we're talking about a lot of beloved shows, when the One Tree Hill cast actresses from that, they came up about how Mark Schwann, the showrunner, he was an abusive piece of shit who treated them all terribly. It's people loved One Tree Hill, but just because this guy was a creep, that doesn't mean they're not going to love it. Sophia Bush and Hillary Burton, they still talk about how much they love the show and those characters. It's not that they're supporting Mark Schwann's bad behavior or even an actor ruining a show. In theory, Allison Mack on Smallville, the character of Chloe was great, but Allison Mack, not great. If you want to,
I think time will still tell. No,
I don't know. I think maybe I should defend Allison Mack.
Let's wait for all the facts to be in first.
LaToya, I love that you're dropping all these other shows. That's very you.
I'm let me just keep it in the WB family, and that's what I got. So.
Yeah, I'm going to take it outside for a minute, though. And in terms of just separating the art from the artist, I think also is problematic because usually when people use that phrase, they're talking about it like a clean cut. We can just keep this poem and forget that this dude was a big jerk. We're having a conversation about how we can look at Buffy and the Buffyverse without allowing the taintedness of the author to affect everything else good that happened about it. At the same time, though, we're not ignoring it in that clean-cut separation way. Yeah. I hope that I articulated that well enough.
No, I think that's a really good point. Yeah, because it's not ignoring what happened. It's not pretending like it didn't happen or like it didn't matter. It's acknowledging that it happened, but also acknowledging that Buffy was bigger than that.
Yeah, I think, yes, I do. And I think that's more what I'm trying to get at is I don't want to talk about him in relation to the show moving forward, only because for me, I'm not trying to compliment him. I'm not trying to compliment I'm not trying to be like, oh, in his mind, but also, I don't know. I feel like we as a podcast, I mean, all of you have been with the podcast for a long fucking time at this point. And I don't think, sometimes he would come up, but it's not like we were always bumping his writing ego, whatever anyway, right?
I mean, it's one of these things where like, spoiler alert, none of us here are teens anymore. I'm so sorry to break this to everybody.
God damn it. I told you not to tell anyone.
I'm so sorry. I have to wake you from this nightmare. But yes, the dreamer must awaken. We are adults. And this is the responsibility of like adulthood, where it's in everything. It is, you kind of have to parse the bad parts of that's pretty much life. Is like, here's the bad part of this human being I actually know, and is still in my life and has to be in my life. Or here is this, country I live in, that has a really bunch of bad stuff going on that I still have to be a part of somehow. And I think it's one of these things where I think, that's very well put, is that, it's high time we stop saying that Buffy is a feminist show. Because again, it's just one of these things where it's like the feminist like bit in 1997 was like, what if this woman was powerful instead of not powerful? Like it's kind of very basic, but like back in 1997, it was such a desert. That was
right.
We were. I think that's why a lot of us found the show during that late 90s, early 2000s. Was there was not a lot of stuff like that, and this was something that long since needed to be given a lot more voice to, and then so a lot of actors and writers and other voices finally were like, great, something is actually going on right now that I've been wanting to talk about for a really long time. And so everybody kind of brought their own experiences to the center. And the auteur thing is very, God needs to go. Like, it just is, it's one of those things where like, even like, I mean, directors in the 1970s would be, this is really when auteur was at its highest. And this is when director bad behavior was really rampant. I mean, like, there's stories from, and this is on the, I'm not even spilling, secrets here. This is on the DVD making of, like William Friedkin on the set of The Exorcist would fire live rounds like throughout the day just to keep everyone on set tense. Because he wanted that air of tension in the set. And it was to the point where like Max von Sydow would walk in and be like, oh, hello, where are the guns today? And he would say, oh, I don't know. You'll have to find out. Like a match, like it's just these things. And, these behaviors have just been so baked in for so long. And especially someone like Joss, who, I guess assembled a good team of really talented people who really probably would have found good work without him as well. But this was a good arena for all of those writers, Marty Noxon, Janice Benson, and the list goes on and on to showcase that work. Which is why when he, bounced kind of midway through the show, it was still good. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think about that. Yeah.
Adam, can we get rid of our tours after I become a showrunner? Like, we can stop after that. I
swear. No. White cis men, no more our tours.
Okay.
Everybody else. Yeah.
Yay.
So I have a question, though. Okay, so we're talking about, separating artists from, the art and all of that. But where is that line of what's allowed and what's not allowed? Because we're talking in defense of Buffy and why we should all still be allowed to, enjoy Buffy publicly and, things like that, and why Slayerfest 98 is not a bad thing. but like, you think of all these other properties, Harry Potter's been under attack because of J.K. Rowling, and then like Jeepers Creepers because of that director, and like, but then, like, you see, like, are people still allowed to support Jeepers Creepers or Harry Potter? Like, what is allowed and what is not allowed, and what says what is allowed and what's not allowed?
So I was looking into Harry Potter fandom because I think it's one of the other, like, it's probably the biggest fandom in the world right now, maybe. And I mean, J.K. Rowling is a horrible transphobe with a lot of power, and that's disgusting. And I remember my personal feelings when she first came out as being a transphobe, and then that's just piled on over the years. And there are trans fans of Harry Potter, right? People that grew up with this entrenched in their identity and their childhood. And I could imagine, that people don't want to give that up. It's become a part of them in the same way that, Buffy has touched all of our lives and, some in a lot of ways. So I looked something up, and there's a website called muggles.net or MuggleNet or something. And they have this page where they talk about like where they stand with J.K. Rowling being a transphobe. And they lay out exactly how they feel and exactly how they're going to deal with it moving forward. And I just thought it was such a good way to make a clear stance. And they've got like a link to the trans, what is it called? The Trans Lifeline and the National Domestic Abuse Violence Hotline, like all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm a lot of my fandoms have gone away recently. I'm super Harry Potter fan, and this was something that I haven't touched it since it all went down, and probably, one day I'll pick it back up. I think it's a very personal decision, and I think a lot of folks in the publishing industry are still figuring out like kind of how, like the publishing, the kind of book Instagram folks, like the people who like really kind of, promote those things. And I think it really comes down to sort of like a multifold sort of thing. And it really is all kind of personal. And I think it really is about, first and foremost, speaking it out loud. J.K. Rowling is transphobic and is doing monstrous harm to trans people's lives and how we talk about trans people, for, and how, it is affecting the narrative. It's affecting laws in the UK. It's having real on the ground damage right now. And so first and foremost, it's acknowledging that, like kind of we've been saying about Joss, it's just speak it out loud. This is the truth that goes hand in glove with the thing you love. I think especially if it's a personal thing to you, I think a lot of people are kind of taking a money approach to this because, I think a lot of people are maybe, not wrongly justifying and saying, okay, I will enjoy the Harry Potter things that I've already purchased. I will not purchase a new thing.
Right. Yeah.
Which is cool. But again, I don't think we're going to de-rich J.K. Rowling. It's just kind of, it's a more of a personal,
right.
Where do you, just like we're not going to de-rich Chick-fil-A.
Unfortunately.
Listen, it's so, it's one of those things where it's like, that's a personal just choice. And so I'm usually not ever erring on the side of like attack someone who is just kind of posting about the thing that they already do. But also my last point, and then I will let other people speak, is, I think it's also about, well, what are you, especially with Harry Potter fans, like for me, I go, wow, I love that world, and I could reread it and rewatch it all the time, before last year. But I think also you need to kind of ask yourself and go, is there another book you can boost right now, or is there another book you can read right now instead? Have you closed yourself off to something because of your love of one thing, like super, intensely? And I have things that I intensely love that are my comfort things, but also kind of taking that time to ask yourself, like, have I supported another fantasy world by an author who is themselves trans or queer or just someone not bad that we know of yet?
One, speaking the thing that I think that's crucial. Two, the fact that every fan gets to make their own decision and their own personal choice. I think that's really important, especially considering that some people may be more personal affected. So every fan and also every person who was involved in the making of the show gets to make their own choice and how they engage with it and how they feel about it. And then I want to add something that I think Adam was tangentially sort of dancing around, the idea of listening to those who were affected. So listening to Charisma, listening to Amber, listening to Michelle, and also listening to those who have been in situations similar to that as well, and are fans of the show and have maybe a different perspective, of being a survivor of emotional abuse. I think that it's really important to not be like, oh yeah, but this is how I feel, but to listen to people who maybe are in different situations than the way that you might feel about it is another crucial thing to do when something like this happens, and particularly with the Josh/Buffy situation.
And I think too, being aware of platforms and of power. Like I used to, when I was doing my promotional tour for Slayer and Chosen, I would make very casual, like Harry Potter jokes, like, oh, it's because she's a Hufflepuff or whatever, like that shorthand. And I don't make those anymore because I don't know if anyone in my audience is trans. I don't know. I don't know that, and I shouldn't know that. And I'm not going to make them afraid that maybe I don't value who they are, right? Because I'm just so casually referencing this property that's owned and run by a person who's a transphobe, right? So like whatever my personal relationship to Harry Potter is, however like I feel about it, whatever I choose to do in my home or my own personal fandom, whatever, I'm not going to bring that with me into spaces where referencing it or talking about it without context is going to make potentially someone who is already at risk or already feels, threatened by that property, by the opinions held by J.K. Rowling. It's going to make them feel worse. It's going to make them feel unsafe, or it's going to make them feel like I don't value them. And I think it's the same. And I think that's why it's so important that we're doing this episode, because we acknowledge, like, yes, Buffy's a thing that we've loved. It's a thing that a lot of us have engaged with professionally. So we have to acknowledge, like, Joss Whedon created a toxic work environment. He was emotionally abusive. So yes, we do love this thing. We do participate in it, but the things that he did are not okay, and we don't condone them. And if this means that you can no longer enjoy Buffy, that's okay. Like absolutely remove that thing from your life if it's triggering or if it hurts you.
I think these are fantastic answers, because the thing is, it just is going to be selective from person to person. I think you really, that's just perfect, is you have to go with what you're comfortable with, also take into account the victims of whatever situations and what spaces you're bringing it into. I completely agree with that. And, I guess the right answer is just what you are comfortable with and how you're able to see it. But I wish we lived in a perfect world where everybody thought that, right? I wish that when you go out and post about something, that like tons of people are not going to hound you for this opinion, or you won't catch me posting about Harry Potter. I've never been a Harry Potter fan, but like even my husband, like you won't catch him going and posting about Harry Potter, because then there'd be tons of people kind of going in on him about that, and understandably, because there are a lot of people who are hurt by that. And I don't know. I wish more people understood that it just does have to be an individual basis kind of thing, and you personally, what you are comfortable supporting and what you're not.
Yeah. I think also when people are very anti-capitalist, this comes to mind. Like people will be negative about something having to do with capitalism, and it's like, well, you probably participate in capitalism,
100%.
Don't be like, shitting on me because I bought something from Target. I bet you at some point like bought gas from somebody who gave money to like ExxonMobil or something. Anyway, sorry.
I will say, Kim, I love when you do that, because Kim makes me feel, whenever someone is like trying to whatever, Kim will be like, did you ask them if they have an iPhone? Because
exactly. Get it.
My point is, we all get to choose how much we participate, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to not look for and appreciate the nuance in situations like this when it comes to personal decisions and respecting others.
Yeah.
The J.K. Rowling thing, I absolutely understand why that is like the first sort of parallel, but I think in some ways it's an imperfect comparison, because J.K. Rowling wrote these novels, entirely by herself, created that world by herself before it was then, turned into movies, and then her worldview later tainted it. Whereas with Joss, it was like, yeah, he had the idea, but, as was Rory said, like, he had the idea, but then it was very much from day one a collaborative process where without Sarah Michelle Gellar, without Charisma Carpenter, without Alison Hannigan, that show wouldn't have existed. And so it's different to be like, okay, these were incredibly gifted actresses who were putting in the performances of their careers while putting up with such bullshit, as opposed to here is a franchise that was made, filmed over years, where later on it was kind of cast under a shadow.
I'm going to bring up what my mom has said, because I know people who listen to the podcast appreciate hearing Alicia Crawford's opinions. My mom was like, I was telling her about J.K. Rowling when that like all happened, because my mom, she hadn't heard anything about it. Because also I do, I worked at a bookstore. We all of us here are extremely online. I would bet there are people that don't know she's a raging transphobe, that like maybe like are fans of Harry Potter, but like don't have Twitter or don't have whatever. Because I work at a bookstore and that stuff still sells, not as well as it used to, but it's still like people still buy it. And I'll see queer people still buying it. Someone with like a rainbow bracelet or a rainbow shirt or whatever buying Harry Potter. And I'll think, you know what? I bet they don't even know because they're not like so online. Yeah. And like, who's talking about that on like the news? You know what I mean? Like that's not a big thing. But so when I told my mom about it, I told her how, Daniel Radcliffe and, I almost said and Hermione, Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson like came out and said that, trans women are women and trans men are men, even though J.K. Rowling said whatever. And my mom said, they don't know her shit because they made her books better and made her more money, not the other way around. Right. Like, and then when I told my mom about Joss, she said, oh, I wish that Buffy could slay that Josh Whedon. He looks like that type of man. But yes, she says Josh every time. I was just going to say, does she say Josh? She does. She always says Josh.
I love it.
One of my friends was like, I hope your mom runs into him someday and gets to call him Josh to his face just to like add insult to injury.
Yeah, like I think that's another responsibility of being a very online person is you do have that information and not everybody does. So this is one of those things where like my nieces are 6 and 4. They are mega into Harry Potter, and so very early on, I'll just start to sneak stuff in, as well to kind of counterbalance and do a little counterweight there. And I don't think their parents know kind of what's going on, so it just kind of is just like no, it's just a fun thing for kids, and I'm like yes, but also.
Then the also the like perils of being extremely online is then you're the buzzkill who has to be like, well, actually, this is bad.
I'm the angry uncle. They look at me like I'm the angry uncle.
I mean, Kim, you and I have to do that with our family often, right?
Be the person who is the buzzkill, yeah, for sure. But I don't mind when it's something that they absolutely should not be saying, and I'm not going to let them say something like that. And if they don't have other friends like me, then I have to be that person for sure, and I don't mind.
Yeah, and like,
do you know who was a buzzkill? Buffy Summers. A lot of the times, people didn't like what she had to say, but at the end of the day,
with great power comes great responsibility.
Yes.
People didn't like what she had to say? What the hell?
They did throw her out of her own home like twice.
Oh my god.
That was Joyce not liking what she had to say. There you go. There's your example.
There we go.
At this point, to me, the question is less of am I still supporting Buffy, and more of how can I support Ray Fisher? How can I support Charisma Carpenter? How can I support these actors who were in this position and who gave some of the most incredible performances that changed my life and took enormous steps of bravery? I mean, what Ray Fisher did was so massive. And Charisma too, but I mean, Ray's a relatively young actor. He's still pretty like at the beginning of his career. And that was a massive, brave step that he took. And so I want to support him in whatever way I can. I want to support Charisma and these people that mean so much.
Right, because I think it's dangerous to come forward at any moment. I mean, Adam, you said this earlier in the recording, how like people just like they're worried, then they're the problem. And I mean, Ray Fisher was labeled like the problem at first, right? Like I not to drag him into this, but I do remember Alan Tudyk like tweeting, well, I never had a problem with Joss Whedon. He was always like super nice to me. And it's like, well, that's not the time to say that. Like, maybe don't do that.
You, Adam.
But like, yeah, he like tweeted something about how like Joss was like always nice to him. And it's like, all right, well, like maybe then you don't say anything. That's I believe you that he was nice to you. No one's gonna come for you over that. But like that's not what we're talking about. And I do think also like Ray Fisher not only was he a young actor, but he's a young black man, and Charisma Carpenter's a woman. And I feel like both of those like maybe if you're a straight white dude and you speak out, there's less of a chance of something bad happening. But even then, you could be labeled a problem. So if you're like anything but a cis straight white dude, like you absolutely, it's a million times worse, right? And I mean, I'm glad that Ray Fisher is at least, they did film more of the, we're not talking about Justice League, but he did get to flesh out his role. He did get to, do the thing that his character was supposed to do. And I hope he gets to be in the other DC movies. I don't want this affecting people's careers because that does suck. That does and it is, I'm sure, like you said, Dana, that I'm sure that's so hard. And I'm sure I can only imagine, I get anxious doing any recordings. I get anxious, waking up. I can't imagine the anxiety you feel when you're like, I need to say something. Like, this is bad. I need to say something. I worked at a job in New York where one of the maintenance dudes was quote unquote in love with one of our female managers. And he ended up harassing her and we all complained about it and we all got fired. We all said that we would all quit if something didn't happen. And then they released us, all of us that complained. And I don't think that's that uncommon, for me, it was a stupid minimum wage job. So it was I was like, all right, well, fuck you. I'm quitting. Great. I'll be released. But that wasn't my livelihood. And when it is, that makes it so much harder and so much scarier. I can't even imagine it being in a famous position where you have to say something and people are going to examine and analyze it to death and somehow make you the villain. Like we said, with Charisma, there's not even that villain story, which is untrue, isn't even a villain story. Yet here we are where for years it was, oh, how dare she get pregnant? Even though anyone who's watched any show ever, especially in the late 90s, Adam, right? There's a whole season of Seinfeld where Elaine is wearing big coats and carrying things in front of her.
It's also, but it's one of those things where it's a little confirmation bias where it's if you hear again, it's kind of baked into a lot of society for the longest time of there is all caps the crazy actress or something,
right?
Or it's you'll hear the story of Sean Young going to get Tim Burton or whatever, but it was kind of there's different stuff to that, and then you kind of these sort of apocryphal stories come on, and then so when you hear it, you're just oh, that's another one of those situations. And so I think it's very, very easy if it fits that societal narrative to just go, oh yeah, I'm sure she was difficult or blah 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 blah, fill in the blank, however you fill in the blank with your feelings about that. And so yeah, it's extremely hard to fight against the title now.
And it just, what's so fucking ridiculous is that it even had to reach Ray Fisher. It had to get all the way to Ray Fisher. All of these rumors and these other people who had spoken out before, and even his fucking wife spoke out, Joss Whedon's wife. You remember that?
Yes.
It had to get all the way to Ray Fisher before any sort of tumbling started happening. It's ridiculous.
I mean, here he is telling Gal Gadot, "You're never going to eat lunch in this town again, Wonder Woman."
and you know what? Think what you want about her, but she went right to the studio heads, and he did not mess with her again.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, Dana, Wonder Woman. You're saying this to Wonder Woman, you fucking stupid idiot. And she was already Wonder. It's not like this was her first Wonder. She did Wonder Woman already, and it was a success. At this point, it's I don't know. I go back and forth with Adam. You brought up Marvel, and I think we've talked about this. How I almost feel like Disney is so strict. Disney makes everyone sign an NDA for every single thing, and there's no way anyone will ever say anything. But I almost feel like all of those actors were already so famous, and maybe they had people watching on set or
well, he also, because he also, I mean, I'm not trying to say Disney is currently suppressing, I'm not trying to be Tucker Carlson here, but
right.
It's there's also he strikes me as the type of fella who is very aware of who is vulnerable in a room and who is not vulnerable in a room.
And why are we still hiring these cis, white, straight men who have written 1,000 things a million times already when we have so many other writers in the world who can, write new things that are going to be just as good / maybe even better? It seems like these men always seem to be, and I'm sure there are women out there too that are terrible.
Because they're the same demo is the gatekeeper, is they're the executives, like they're all.
And that's funny, Philip, we were talking about this before recording, because Philip, you watched The Nevers, and I want you to talk about how you kind of felt the same way what Kim just said.
Yeah, so I mean, well, first of all, like I was a little bit reluctant to watch it just because, obviously, you know, it's been billed as like the latest Joss Whedon show, and the credits are very much like written by, created by, blah blah blah, executive produced by. And then I had to kind of have a word with myself, and I was like, well, no, like here is a cast of, you know, I mean, well, in the UK, there's some very well known people in it, but the sort of the main female characters is like largely, you know, unknown actresses, and like you know, they still deserve their big break. So I watched it. I enjoyed it. Some of it, it basically is like playing Joss Whedon bingo, though. There's, you know, sort of his idea that a woman, a female strong character involves her literally being like physically strong. Like unless she can do a backflip and then like high kick a guy in the face, she is not worthy of being the protagonist. And then like there is, because it's set in, you know, Victorian London, it's the sort of like steampunk X-Men, which obviously is a very, very inviting premise. There is a character who is basically Drusilla II. She is just this hysterical Victorian archetype who is literally spouts horrendously sort of overwrought dialogue, and it's like, oh, I mean, maybe Juliet Lander could have done this. And I love Amy Manson, who plays this character. She's been great. She was in Being Human, the British version. I loved her, but it's just.
Okay.
And then when we get to the end of I think I don't know if it's like the first season finale or the mid-season finale, but there is a huge, and I won't spoil it for you, but basically he recycles a plot device from Dollhouse that is such an enormous gamble. And it's the fact that, like, literally 10 years later, he does the exact same trick as if he thinks that everyone else has forgotten he has already done this. And it's kind of borderline offensive that he is just playing his greatest hits and hoping that no one else will notice that he's already done it better before.
And like, right, that's a problem with that would be a writer problem even if he weren't also a fucking problem. Like if he were still like, if we didn't know any of this, that would still be like, get a new idea,
yeah,
right?
It's this
like
kind of a cushioning where he just thinks he can get away with everything. And obviously it's impossible to watch this new show without being coloured by everything that's come out about him over the last couple of months. But it really was. I was just like, oh, I'm really loving what these actresses are doing, and I'm really loving. Clearly, there's a writer's room, and there's directing, and there's and the production design. I mean, it's a gorgeous show to watch. But it really was just like, oh god, I mean, I'll be really interested to see what happens moving forward, because obviously he's now left the show, and so to see like what happens with these characters and with this story when like other people get there, go with it. But it was very much like Adam, what you were saying earlier, you know, oh, what if a woman who is not normally powerful or was powerful, it's literally that. It's like, oh, it's Victorian London, women are weak nothings except these few. And it was just like, it was hard work.
Yeah, I mean, we recently watched Sex and the City, and it was, you know, and it's a similar like this isn't as nearly as forward thinking as we thought, you know, and it's like she literally is like king shaming. They're all 200 episodes. They all have dated 199 episodes of dating white guys. Like it's very like it's they're all wealthy, and you know, she's like, "My people don't exist." Like it's really wild to just be like, "Wow, this were we starving at that point?"
Well, we were.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
You know, I often think of that meme that came out before these allegations against Joss, and before, I think it was even before J.K. Rowling came out as a like raging transphobe. That like meme of like where it's three people, like the three like muscle arms grabbing, yeah. And it was like J.K. Rowling, RuPaul, Joss Whedon, and in the middle it was like being progressive for the 90s but not updating since. And like that is true. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of this, you know, I think of a lot of the LaToya, I don't mean to get you worked up, but I think of a lot of handling of like even Andrew is like, like I like Andrew and I love Tom Lank, but like Andrew's like he has that bit in Angel where he's like, things may not be what they seem. And he's like with a bunch of women and supposed to be like, look, he's not gay. Ha ha, wink, wink.
You're not going to get me worked up. I just want to say, Suri, play Vindicated. I've been saying this for years and you know this, Ian. So there you go.
I know. That's why I mentioned you. Because we've been getting into season 7, even getting into it. It's like, one, none of the Spike stuff works for me, and I am someone who likes Spike, but none of it works that well. And Andrew's arc, it's like, okay, well, he kills Jonathan, but Jonathan would have been the most redeemable of the 3.
Mm-hmm.
And Jonathan dies, and Andrew just sticks around to be fun comic relief, and it's like. It gets when I remember watching it and being like, wow, they're all really mean to him. But watching it now, it's like, yes, of course they're all really mean to him.
Ian, did you say wink, wink, or twink, twink?
Both.
I said wink, wink, but now I wish I said twink, twink.
Yeah, I haven't watched season 7 in a while, and I would be nervous too because it's just they're so aggressive to him.
I specifically remember there's a scene where Andrew's holding these cocktails, these enormous cocktails, and there's some very subtle but obvious now joke about his perhaps homophobia. And I was on this episode, and I remember whatever the joke was being I feel bad that I thought that was funny. Am I allowed to think that's funny? So just wanted to.
Oh yeah, in season 6 when they're at the yeah, and I just it's okay to love something, but also acknowledge I think almost all of you have been on the podcast and encountered this where someone has listened to an episode and kind of felt that maybe we don't love this show, and we do love it, and it's just you can bring nuance to it, the nuance of right now to a show that was back then. Doesn't mean we hate it. It just means oh well, this sure doesn't work right now. There's an episode. And I actually was wait, I revisited. There's an episode in season 1 of Angel, LaToya, where Cordelia, the subtitles say she says Deb, but I'm positive she actually says Dyke. Because she says, oh, and that woman, she's clearly a closeted, and the captions say Deb, but that's not
what the fuck is the closeted Deb? Like a debutante?
As the resident Deb here, no, that is not a thing.
But also, I remember in season 1 of Angel, Cordelia uses the R slur, more than once, and it's not great.
And you know what I mean? We can still be yeah, this is a show I love, but
it's not like it's that 70s show. That show is hands down terrible and offensive from start to finish. Yes, I watched the whole thing.
I remember being a teen watching that live and being this probably isn't good.
Yeah. Everything is bad and offensive, beginning to end.
All I remember from that show is the gay episode where I was very excited, where Joseph Gordon-Levitt played a gay character, but then it was just he's bad and he's a predator.
They did what?
Tries
what
to
is he talking about?
LaToya, do you remember that episode?
Do, but I love that was appointment television for you.
Wait a minute.
It really was.
Little Ian, oh my God. Just they're going to be, Jason Lee's going to be gay, and he's a predator.
He's recording it on the VCR.
I probably did. I was really hoping him and Eric Foreman would get together.
Oh, is he I don't care if you're straight, I'm going to come at you.
I just remember even back then being frowning by the end. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I guess we will wrap up here. Thank you guys for doing this. This went really well. Thank you all for being so fucking reliant and wonderful. I feel like you all had really smart things to say about this. You had smarter things than I had to say about this.
You guys are all smart. Even you, Ian. I'm a fucking dumbass.
LaToya, you are the TV
LaToya.
Historian. Excuse me.
I do as well. Yes.
Love you guys.
I remember when I think it was Charisma, when you asked her about the commercial, and she was shocked that you remembered the commercials.
Yeah.
Whenever you're talking, LaToya, I set my ass up and listen.
I don't actually remember anything I said in that interview because I did black out. Nerves, baby.
But yeah, so I mean, I just think the reason I still want to continue with this show, and, I think a lot of, you still continue talking the show too, LaToya, is there are things worth talking about, and it's still ingrained. I do think it's very much ingrained in pop culture. And I think you can't pretend otherwise, right? So yeah, I wanted everyone to know this is why we are going to finish up season 7. It's why we took that long break. Every time a new episode came out, people would be like, wait, but when's Buffy coming out? And I will say that I think you all might agree with me or not. I don't know. When the statements came out from Charisma and they started coming out from everyone and Amber and Michelle, I just didn't feel comfortable talking about the show. I didn't feel comfortable asking people to talk about the show. I didn't quite know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to pause it because I myself didn't feel comfortable. I didn't want any of you to feel uncomfortable, like coming on. I've had people since say they do not want to talk Buffy anymore, and I respect that. But thankfully, I have all of y'all who still want to talk Buffy, and I kind of just wanted us to do this before we get back so everyone listening can know where we stand, can know where the podcast is going moving forward, and why he will be not part of the conversation. And if he does, it will be a footnote, if that.
I thought this was the end of Slayerfest 98. I thought this was the finale show. I'm thrown for a loop a little bit.
You're continuing the show, Ian. That's very irresponsible.
Jeez, Ian, have you not listened to a word we've said?
Coming from the Angel on Top host. And now for a quick break. Folks, do you love movies? The good ones? Even the bad ones everyone told you not to like? It sounds like Super Yaki is the place for you. The team at Super Yaki loves movies. So much so they've dedicated every waking moment of their life to bringing you top quality merchandise to showcase your love for them. From super soft t-shirts celebrating the 20th anniversary of the cinematic masterpiece Josie and the Pussycats, to comfy sweatshirts made for the brave members of the Movies by Yourself Club. They even have pins of some of your favorite directors, like Sofia Coppola and Jordan Peele. Super Yaki joyously brings you tangible love letters to movies and filmmakers that you can wear with pride. Plus, the team at Super Yaki screen prints all their apparel using eco-friendly, 100% water-based inks, and ships with compostable poly mailers for an environmentally friendly alternative to online shopping. And as a special gift to you, listeners can save 10% on their order with the code SUPERSlayerFest, all caps, no spaces, at checkout. If the spirit moves you, find them at superyaki.com. Let's watch more movies, y'all. That's what I wanted to do for this episode, and I really appreciate all of you. I gotta say, I think Adam or Philip, before we started recording, were like, this is like the Avengers Endgame of Slayerfest, and it really is. I'm glad you all came out of the portals to support me and be here and talk about this. So you all know where to find us. But if you like the podcast, find us on social media at SlayerFestX98. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and everywhere else. If you like us, you can subscribe to the Patreon. And if you want to find me on social, I'm at ENXCarlos. Philip, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Philip_Ellis. That's Philip with 1 L and Ellis with 2.
Dana, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Dana Pickley. That is 2 C's 1 L.
And LaToya, where can everyone find you?
I'm on Twitter at LaFergs. If you're going to tweet at me, don't do a correction of any of my bits. Don't take them seriously. Just leave me alone. Actually, don't follow me or tweet at me or say anything to me.
Don't perceive LaToya at all. Adam, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Twitter at the Adam Sass. If you didn't like anything I had to say, my name is Caleb Rarick.
Zach, where can everyone find you?
I don't know. My Bloody Judy, I guess, on Slayerfest 98. I don't fucking know. That's all. Yeah.
All right. Kim, where can everyone find you?
I'm at Kim and Joe South.
And Kirsten, where can everyone find you?
I'm on Twitter at Kirsten White, on Instagram at author Kirsten White, on your local bookstore's bookshelves. Again, unless you didn't like something I had to say, in which case I'm Adam Sass.
Damn!
All right, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye. Bye.